I don't know about you, but it feels bittersweet to me to be at the end of two such powerful days of sessions together. And because we're working with a humble crew and I don't know what other opportunity we're going to have, I want to be sure that we give another round of applause to the leadership and volunteers of Iowa. I think they set a high bar, the panels before us set a high bar, but I can assure you this, with this group of women, we will end strong. So soon after Jennifer took on her position as executive director, we had a wide-ranging discussion about leadership in Armenian organizations and in our community writ large. We spoke pragmatically about women managing Armenian nonprofit organizations, but we also wondered sort of more broadly about how each of us got to this point in our careers as Armenian women. And what were the sociological and historical and cultural influences kind of brought to bear upon how we and how women are valued or at times minimized, perhaps, as leaders in our community? And perhaps more importantly, what responsibility do we have within Armenian organizations or individually as leaders to prime a pipeline of the next generation of activists, of executives, of philanthropists, leaders? So the breadth of this conference, and I think specifically this panel, kind of personifies the questions we were raising. So before I introduce my esteemed colleagues, I just want to note, by way of brief background, that my thinking on these issues is unquestionably guided by my life's work as an educator. I come from the small but mighty Armenian community in southern Illinois, right next door to St. Louis, Missouri. My maternal grandmother was a survivor of the genocide, coming to this country at the age of 11. I always have to mention her, but then I always cry. Enrolling in first grade at 11 and then graduating from high school on time with her peers at the age of 18. So it's no surprise that my family's expectations were always high. They were always gender blind, and boundaries were non-existent. That said, I was an anomaly, leaving our small, tight-knit, and assimilated community to go to graduate school in New York and to work and teach in 3 countries, including Armenia. I've always really been empowered by the pride that they feel collectively in me. I mean, they certainly influenced and shaped me, our small, as I said, very tight-knit community. And I feel like I'm representing them as I try to devote any time I can to Armenian causes, both in the diaspora and in Hayastan. So the through line in my work has always been social justice, and especially as related to the pursuit of equal opportunities and access for all, which comes as a no-brainer, I think, to me. We're talking about the cards we were dealt, because it's just the sort of least I can do in honor of our ancestors and in gratitude for those we have sainted. So it's with that sort of in mind that I'm just really delighted to facilitate this culminating panel with this extraordinary group of women, not just, by the way, those who served on the panels before us, but I've been really just so impressed with and inspired by all the sidebar conversations that, again, I credit the organizers for making sure we had time for those, because, as we all know, great ideas can be generated in this room, but the action takes place often outside there. And you get to a point in your life where you think you've met every Armenian you're going to meet that, you're kindred with in thinking or in any other way. And this has proven to me that there are so many more of us who can be working together, and I'm so excited to see what comes of this. But I also think it illustrates how our community has survived against all the odds. All of you illustrate that in my mind. I think what we've learned also, sort of in our conversations, is that as women in our community, we've all had to consciously and unconsciously negotiate our gender-based and cultural identities, whether in our workplaces or in our homes, within or outside of our Armenian community. no small feat given all else we juggle as, the lifeblood of the Armenian nation. So it brings us to the kinds of questions that our panel has been tasked with answering and that is certainly poised to address. Sort of namely, how does our culture affect our self-image and our identity as women and as leaders? So I want to turn to our esteemed panelists to explore these and additional topics. So Dr. Lerna Ekmekcioglu is the Macmillan Stewart Career Development Associate Professor of History at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And as for those of you who've been here all day, we started the day with the brave Selena Dogan, who certainly earned one of the most deserving standing ovations I've ever been a part of. And Selena credited Lerna as a partner in her efforts, and I really want to echo the courage it takes for Lerna to publish the research that she conducts on Armenians in post-genocide Turkey. I personally think the two of them should co-chair Selena's brilliant idea of having a AWA conference in Bolis, but I don't want to be the one to volunteer them. I love that idea. Lerna became interested in feminism in college when she first researched the Turkish women's movement and discovered that the only information available centered on Muslims. Non-Turks were simply absent, so she sought out to change that, and she's written that history herself, and for that we're grateful. Dr. Hasmik Baran is a faculty member at Cal State University Northridge in the Department of Modern and Classical Languages and Literatures. She holds leadership roles in a number of Armenian educational institutions and organizations. She's currently teaching a course on the changing roles of Armenian women, which I think all of us would love to Skype into. Maybe we can arrange that. And I selfishly am excited to hear more, in particular, about her research on the role of ethnic culture and work-family balance among Armenian women in leadership positions. And she's focused a lot of her work in higher education, but she has a lot to say sort of more broadly about those issues. Judge Gabrielle Wolahojian is an Associate Justice of the Massachusetts Court of Appeals. Gabrielle is the highest-ranking Armenian female, and just like the debates, we need fact-checkers here, but we're pretty sure she might be the highest-ranking Armenian male judge in the United States. Female. No, but I'm saying you might be male as well. We need.
Oh, I think I'm the highest-ranking Armenian-American judge in the States.
Yeah. So see. And the first female Armenian appellate judge in the United States, the first. Plus, it's hard to know how to address her with a JD, a PhD, and as a judge, we want to give credit for all of her titles and incredible achievements. Not for nothing, she is also an accomplished violinist, a performing member of the Boston Civic Symphony, where she also serves on the board of directors and the Boston Bar Association. And last but certainly never least, Carolyn Mugar, the executive director of Farm Aid and founder of the Armenia Tree Project. Carolyn has long been in the trenches advocating for sustainability well before sustainability was sexy. For those of you who don't know the powerful impact that Farm Aid has had, and again, as a Midwesterner, I've known about Farm Aid since its inception and have always had tremendous respect for the impact it's had on addressing the challenges faced by America's farmers. Inspired by musicians Willie Nelson, John Mellencamp, and Neil Young, the organization has held annual concerts that have raised over $50 million to promote strong family farm systems of agriculture, and also to advocate for fair farm policies and grassroots organizing campaigns around these issues. Most of you know Carolyn when she wears her other hat. How many of you have planted a tree through the Armenia Tree Project? The rest of you will after you leave here.
Thank you.
Armenia Tree Project, there's literally nothing like it, has planted more than 5 million trees in Armenia and Artsakh since its inception in 1994. The organization has established 4 nurseries, 2 environmental education centers, and has greened community areas in every province of Armenia and Artsakh. In the process, ATP has produced employment opportunities for hundreds of people and provided vital resources to thousands of village residents. So we're going to spend a few minutes with each panel sort of individually. Then I have some general questions I'd love us to try to explore, and then we'll open the floor to questions. So Lerna, I want to start with you to give us an historical perspective. So her new book, which again everyone needs to take a peek at, it is a very, very important work called Recovering Armenia: The Limits of Belonging in Post-Genocide Turkey. So you give us a history of the Armenian women's movement, and we know that feminists, even immediately after the genocide, paid great attention to ensuring that women were members of the community's organizations, but not just members, also make sure that they were in leadership positions. So can you help summarize this movement for us and give us a sense of what lessons we could and should learn from their experience?
Okay, great. Thank you, Nicole, for this the generous introduction and the opening remarks that you shared with us. It's very valuable. Thank you, Aiva, for the conference. Congratulations. Happy birthday, and to many more. I hope we meet here, some of us at least, in the 50th anniversary celebrations. And hopefully the agenda will have changed by then already, or at least a substantial portion of it, in the sense that we'll have moved already. I should begin by saying that I am a recipient of Aiva Scholarship myself. Thank you, Aiva. It was years ago, of course. I am, as you mentioned, from Istanbul. I did do my undergraduate at Boğaziçi University in sociology department, and then I did come here to do my PhD. I did get a fellowship from NYU for full 5 years, so I did have enough funding to sustain myself, and the Aiva Scholarship was not substantial, but as has been already mentioned, I think by Gayane before, during the spotlight, the fact that some people out there who don't know me but believe in my research and they happen to be Armenian and they happen to be women makes a difference. And it stays with you and it makes you want to give back. Right? So it is a successful project, the scholarship. I devoted 10 years of my life to study the history of gatherings like this. Armenian Women's Association, Hay Ganant Liga, or Engerak Tutyun, as they called it, was established in 1919 in Istanbul. So part of the book that I have here, which you can purchase outside, is about this somewhat unexpected moment of a post-genocide society and their women coming together, wanting more. What did they want? They wanted a lot of things. So this is an organization. It's not Aiva. It's AWA, Armenian Women's Association. Their main goal, they had a lot of goals. They were equally invested in the revival of the Armenian nation after the genocide, the rebirth of the Armenian nation, which included, among others, the goal of reconstituting Mother Armenia, uniting the western and eastern parts of Armenia and reclaiming Medan Hayastan, right? So they were invested in that project, but as well as orphan care, finding the Islamized survivors, returning them to their Armenian roots and community, sheltering formerly kidnapped women, right? So more broadly national goal. But they were equally invested in political equality and leadership, right? It is explicitly stated in their goals. And we know their goals because they had an organ. They had their own publication called Haygin, which was Armenian woman, which was published in Istanbul from 1919 to 1933. Even though the association itself was dissolved in late 1922 when the Kemalist Turkish forces entered the Allied occupied Istanbul. So in the very first issue of Haygin, we see their goals. At the time, so I'm as a historian, I want to provide this narrative because I think it's one of the things that I can bring to the table, really coming from this discipline. But it's also important for us to know and to think about what we don't know and what it does to us when we don't know our own past, be it as Armenian women or be it as Armenian feminists. This journal and the organization itself was explicitly feminist because they were aspiring, as they defined it, they were aspiring for full political, social, civil equality between men and women, as they stated in their programs. At the time in Istanbul, what was the government that they were, what kind of political membership, political subjecthood that they were in search of or they were organized for? Armenian National Assembly was sort of a parliament that met under the Armenian Patriarchate in Istanbul. So it is like the Armenian government for Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, right? And their members, which were elected, were referred to as parliamentarians, Yerespohan, by the Armenians in Istanbul and in other places. So this is a representative body, but it was close to women and men who were younger than 25 years old. So one of the goals of AWA was to have women represented in this decision-making body of the community. And this was something that the Armenian National Assembly debated, but they came to the conclusion, so because the Haygin and AWA campaigned for it, and because they had some supporters, male supporters internally in the parliament, National Assembly, the assembly discussed this, but they came to the conclusion that the time was not right because Armenian nation was busy it was busy dealing with an existential crisis, which wasn't wrong, right? It's 1919, 1920, really. We are not sure yet if we are going to survive as a nation or not. And the way they read it was that now the women, it's too radical of a change to undertake at this moment. The feminist response to that was that it's exactly because it's an existential crisis that you need more of us. So we do the orphan care, we do the traditionally female gendered, taking care of motherhood, nursing, teaching type of things, duties to the nation. But now we can even do more. And by not including us in these decision-making bodies, that the nation is losing, it's not gaining, and then that the nation is strong enough to handle a feminist reformation, as they put it. They did not get that. They lost it. But also, there were different commissions in the parliament, Khurhurt, as they used to call it. Education Commission and Jurisprudence Commission was one of them. So we just heard about domestic violence, right? And the first case. These are all questions that women like us, Armenian women, 100 years ago, they were thinking about them, they were dealing about it, they were having meetings about this. Because Haygin, one of the very first campaigns that Haygin waged was to have women's representation in the jurisprudence, Tadastanahan, Khurhurt. Why? Because Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, up until 1926, even after the Ottoman Empire, could use their own canonical religious laws in reference to their family status law, civil law, yes, marriage, inheritance, divorce, custody, all these things were under the jurisprudence of the church and its particular commissions. But there were no women represented in those. And there were victims of domestic violence. They did not have any other place to go, and they referred to the Women's Association and Haygin and its editor, Haygan Ushmark, in order to find a solution to their problem because they couldn't find a place, right? So when Haygin publicized, and Haygin wasn't a marginalized women's journal it was popular, and I have enough evidence to argue that when Haygin publicized this, and because Haygan Ushmark herself was a well-known person, she intervened, and the patriarch wrote, because she wasn't, the victims of domestic violence weren't granted divorce by the Jurisprudence Commission. Why? Because the nation needs to keep its families intact, right? Especially at this moment of real demographic anxiety, we cannot break families, as even we now hear, right? And then which means that national preservation might have to come at the expense of some women's bodies or their choices. Women wanting divorce, not getting divorce. So Haygin made a case that if we had women represented in these commissions, we could have more favorable results. The decisions would be more favorable for women. And they applied to the responsible authorities, but they were rejected. Why? Because the condition for membership for this in this commission was that that every member had to have a law degree. And then there were no women with law degrees. Why? Because the law school was closed to women. This is the cycle, right? Okay, the second campaign that Haygin waged was for the Education Commission. And it's so smart, because all teachers, as they are now, were women, even then, right? Even the principals, there were women's schools. Armenian women since 1870s opened up Armenian schools in the provinces, and even opened up schools to train teachers for these schools, right? This is where they are the strongest in terms of public roles. So they were successful. The Education Commission accepted offering 2 seats to women, right? And one of them was offered to Zabel Asadur, Sibyl, who is 63 at the time, important Armenian female poet, translator, writer, short story writer, playwright, but also teacher, and also writer of textbooks, grammar textbooks that we still use in some schools in Istanbul, right? Tanka. Zabel Asadur, Hrant Asadur, so the couple. Obviously, she was offered, and then Haygan Ushmark was the other. She was also a teacher at Negosyan School, so she was offered. So when Haygan Ushmark goes to the so Sibyl declines this because she's busy with taking care of her husband, who was sick at the time, and according to Haygan Ushmark, she was wise enough to reject this from the beginning, because when Haygan Ushmark goes to the first meeting of the Education Commission that has a woman member, she learns that women can only be auxiliary assistant members of the commission. Despite the fact that even some of the people who were in that room were likely that they were Sibyl's students, Zabel Asadur's students themselves, the men. So Haygan Ushmark leaves the room by saying that who am I? She immediately resigns, thinking that this is not only an insult to her, but to all Armenian women, because she represents the Armenian. That's why she's going there. And then she challenges them by asking, she has this quotation in her autobiography saying, if Sibyl was here, who among you would occupy the seat of presidency only because he's a man? And then she shuts the door and leaves. So these are the kind of, not stories, but anecdotes that fill the book that I write. And I'm guessing that I'm guessing that many of you, most of you, don't know these things. And it's not your it's not your fault, right? We weren't taught these stories. And as I'm growing older and I'm raising my own kids, 2 girls, 10 and 8, who go to Armenian school, who go to Armenian camps, we want to keep them Armenian, right? But at the same time, I do see the kind of, and I know it from my own experience from Istanbul, having gone to Armenian schools for 11 years, that there is a void in what we think our history is. Our history is not unique to us. It's the same almost everywhere, but some nations did a better job of changing this. And I care about Armenians because I am one. And I write its history, which involves women. We don't have Armenian women in our history. Like, how many of us, even in this room, can count 5 significant Armenian women that changed the course of history. Yes, Zabel Yesen, of course, we have heard about it. We will hear. She deserves it. But other, Sose Mayrik, maybe. We have some characters, but they don't populate our past. And we have study after study showing how this historical representation, visibility. Remember the very first panel that we studied? I studied the panel, but listened to, right? How these gender stereotypes can begin to change when we see more women in leadership positions, for instance, visibility. But what happens when we don't have historical examples of women who occupy leadership position? Or we can change the definition of leadership, find our carpet weavers or the mothers who stayed home and passed this tradition to us, all of us. I'm not trying to devalue the non-public roles that women play, right? I think they're actually more important. But having both of them somewhat elevated to our curricula, I think will make a difference in terms of our future when we are thinking about the next generation. Because we were deprived of it. And I think despite the fact that, despite this absence, that we have achieved a lot of success in different aspects of different professions, different lives, is extra remarkable. Because once if you don't have role models in the present, it's a problem. If you don't have a mentor, it's a problem. But what happens if you don't have a role model that comes from? We have the grandmothers, right? That makes us cry. We share this. And we are empowered through them, which is a good thing that keeps us going, right? But there can be an alternative to it without diminishing the memory of the grandmother who survived the pain, the passing, the transmission, but a different version would do it. I'll close with just noting one thing that I cannot note now that I have a safe environment relatively and I feel comfortable. So 2 things. First of all, I was in Armenia last week, as of last week, for 10 days. I did deliver a talk at a conference on women and war, and I did bring up these questions over there as well. This was a keynote speech. I thought this is my time. I should instrumentalize it very well. And I thought, and as I was preparing for it, I recognized that even the monuments that we see in Yerevan, like on a daily basis, we have personified our land as Mother Armenia, right? Mine has done, okay, good, like many nations do. We have the monument up in there, overlooking all of her, omnipresent really, but at the same, we don't know her name. And then you go to Madena Taran, with all due respect to Mesrop Mashtod and his biographer, and all the scholars that we have there, right? I assume everyone knows about Madena Taran. This is a good thing that I don't need to explain. So all male scholars, what does it do? So I think this problem, curriculum, textbook, monuments, it does partly, it's a problem in the homeland, but it's also a problem in the diaspora here, both in the schools, in terms of the history textbooks that my kids receive and the projects that they do, but also in the camps. So last summer, one of my kids did go to one of the summer camps around here. I'm not going to name names because I'm not telling you. It's really not about the political party. It's very non-partisan because I think this, unfortunately, it's a kind of misogyny is shared across parties, across groups. And this camp that she went, 10-year-old, has me as a mother. It says 2 weeks, she spent there 2 weeks, right? And she loved it, and I want her to like this place. So they have a dining hall, and the dining hall has, you go through a corridor of some sort in order to reach the dining hall. And over there are 16 pictures. So I did go there for the visiting day. I didn't mean to think, really. I just missed my daughter. But it's unavoidable. So I was going through the dining hall, the corridor, just to see where they eat. And then 2 sides of the hall, the corridor, they have 16 pictures, literally pictures. It's just one envelope side or no, A4 side paper, picture of the person, important Armenian personality, and then a short summary of who they are, what they did, right? And I will share with you with the names of these people. And this is not a strictly political commentary, okay? Because you'll see most of us will recognize what political party this camp belongs to, right? But it has nothing to do with it. It's broader than that. Christopor Mikaelyan, Simon Zavarian, Stepan Rostomzorian, Charles Aznavour, Armen Garo, Siamanto, Babken Süni, Hovannes Şiraz, Baruir Sevak, Yerishe Çarens, Hovannes Tumanyan, Kevork Çavuş, Gomidas Vartabet, Haçadur Apovyan, Karekin Nijde, Sayat Nova. It's a very eclectic mix, right? But what connects them is that all men. And what does my Zephyr see there? On a daily basis, what kind of a message is the camp sending? What kind of a message am I sending by letting her be there just because I want her to remain Armenian? Again, the same question of why does it have to take a toll on women for us to preserve our cultural identity? Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. All right. There's so much more that I know we'll want to talk to Lerna about afterwards in our Q&A, but I want to bring us up to today a little bit and have Hasmik talk to us about, in particular, work-life balance for women in leadership positions. And in particular, I think sort of what strategies and support systems she has found that women use, Armenians and otherwise, in senior level positions to be helpful in achieving that balance. So, Hasmik, would you mind getting us started with some findings?
First, I'd like to thank the Iowa for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts with you on this special topic. Work-family balance has become an issue in contemporary society as a result of greater participation of women in the workforce. Although women have made great advances and continue to do so, they are still disproportionately represented in leadership positions as they struggle to balance work and family. For example, among Fortune 500 companies, only 16% of corporate officers are women, 14% of board members are women, and 1% of CEOs are women. And as we saw statistics given early in different fields. On their path to leadership, women encounter a number of challenges that limit their representation in senior level leadership positions. As we heard throughout all the panels, societal expectations, along with internal and external barriers and lack of support network, make the task of balancing work-family life more difficult. A conflict that arises from societal norms, individuals' core values about roles as professionals and as homemakers or mothers, and the competing demands of family and work for the limited time available result in work-family role strain, which decreases the psychological well-being of women leaders. Hence, the concept of finding a balance between a professional and a family life becomes important for the health and satisfaction of women leaders. Integrating work and family life and maintaining a sense of balance challenge many women professionals in leadership positions. Despite these challenges, many women have managed to maintain their family life while advancing in their careers. A few years ago, I examined the experience of 3 Armenian women in senior level leadership positions in higher education in the United States, with dual roles as professionals and homemakers. My study dwelt on 4 research questions. First, what are the challenges that these Armenian women face in establishing a work-family balance and in their senior or top-level leadership positions? Second, what support system did they have? What strategies did they employ? And finally, I thought of adding a cultural component to it and said, what strategies, what role does ethnic culture play as a support system in achieving work-family balance? And this study I did as a part of my, when I was working on my doctoral dissertation. And I thought that since I have this opportunity and we do not have a literature in this field, and this will be a good place for me to contribute towards this topic. I found my research revealed that the challenges that women face in balancing work and family emanate from the demands of the dual roles as long hours at work, the house chores, that going back home and taking care of the family and cooking and dealing with family issue and taking care of the children. And not only the children, they had responsibilities towards their parents also. Of course, the gender stereotype was evidently felt, societal expectation in their gender roles, the male-dominated professions. One of my participants came from the engineering field. She had a top-level leadership position in aerodynamics, and she said, in her 27 years in the department of 150 professors and all that, there were only 2 women, and she really felt that that discrimination against her, or they made her feel uncomfortable. And we also heard about the leadership styles that we heard in being more feminine, more communal, versus to the agency type of the male leadership style. A third important point was that making, of course, having a limited amount of time, as we heard from previous panelists, that we only have 24 hours a day, and how can we make all this happen? And of course, to make it happen, we need to make compromises, and those compromises were professional compromises as well as personal sacrifices. In the professional compromises, they accepted positions that met their family needs. They put their family needs first, and they had to decline certain positions that required relocation. And at a time when their children were young, they declined those positions, and then after a few years, when the children grew older, they were able to take those positions. And in terms of their personal time, that was very limited, and when they had to make changes and compromises, their personal time for their own, for exercise, for leisure time, and entertainment was the first on their list that they had to compromise. Another point was that the women's commitment to their social roles ascribed to them, their assertiveness, as we touched upon a lot of those internal barriers that resonated among one of the panels, that they were assertive, confident, and motivated to succeed in both of those roles. The professional compromises and the personal sacrifices were the contributing factors to their work-family balance. In terms of what support system did they have, and of course in 2 domains, personal support as well as their professional support. In the personal support section, their parents had a positive influence on their education and career choices. Their mothers and grandmothers were their role models who became a source of inspiration for them, as we heard from many. And of course, last but not least, their primary source of personal support was their husbands, as a primary personal support. And when my participants had to be married and to have at least 1 child to feel the full load of the family, in addition to that, the husbands were very important. In terms of their professional support, of course, their educational background and experience was important. They had the proper training, and also the gradual advancement in going through the ranks was helpful in their achieving of that success. They had support and encouragement from their professors, mentors, and advisors and colleagues, and also the institutional policies and the resources. They were working in such places that there were institutional support, such as leave of absences, medical and family leave, or the preschool childcare provided for them at the work site. Another finding was their community involvement added additional support for them. They had volunteered the voluntary service to various organizations such as churches, sports, teams, and health facilities added their support base. Another important part that we talked about is gaining trust and respect that was mentioned, that as they volunteered in those organizations, they gained the trust, and then whenever they needed help, that those organizations reciprocated that help because they already had established that trust. It opened being a part of these organizations and being community involvement in their community opened doors to new acquaintances. And we all know that how much networking and acquaintances and partnership with outside of the educational institutions like businesses and otherwise, how important they are. The third is, what were the strategies that they employed to balance work and family? Number one, also we heard a lot during these days, applying democratic and participatory leadership, communicating effectively with family members whenever they had open communication that facilitated mutual understanding, and why mom was absent from home, mom had to do this and we'll do that later on, to explaining and understanding of why she was away. Of course, when time is scarce, time management and being extremely organized is very important. Putting things into perspective. For example, my participant mentioned that the whole family was excited to prepare decorating for Christmas, and she said we had only a limited time to make the decoration. We were tense, we were almost having a fight, and then say, wait a minute, we are doing this. This is a pleasant time of the year, and we're doing this for all of us to enjoy. We took back and relax and continue putting things into perspective. They were making conscious efforts to learn from others' experiences. We heard that this also a lot. I think it was Catherine. I will look at what others. I want to know what others are doing in this field, whether they have succeeded or not. I will do the same. Learning, making a conscious effort of benefiting from others' experiences. And also integrating, not looking at those both roles as conflicting roles, integrating those two roles to balance work and family. Therefore, having a positive dispositional affect, they perceive their two roles mutually beneficial. As leaders, they became role models for their children. And as mothers, their role as mothers gave them positively affected their role as a leader. It made them more approachable, better organized, and more compassionate, gave them more empathy, which you also heard. They become more sensitive to the individual needs of their colleagues. And finally, looking at the ethno-cultural component of work-family balance, I found that the influence of the ethnic culture on developing core values and shaping their identity and career choices, their motivation to develop ethnic pride at a very young age. We all know in the Armenian culture that values education, family, and children, and the need to achieve and excel. And that partially also comes from our history. As in every culture, the historic events do have an impact the way on culture, and we cannot not mention the genocide, that a part of it that we have, how we have lost our culture. We have literature, as you were saying, we don't know because it took us time for several generations for us now to start digging into our history, learning more. As you said, we don't know about our role models, those women and feminists who existed even in the as early as the 19th or the early 20th century. It created a sense of belonging. It strengthened their community ties and provided them with different experiences. It facilitated ethnic networking. And also it had the subconscious influence of ethnic culture in the decision-making process. And a feeling of personal reward and satisfaction by bringing honor to the collective ethnic identity. As we all know, the Armenian culture is classified as being a collectivist society, collectivist culture, in which our collective identity is important, and bringing honor to our collective ethnic existence or name is important. We see that ethnic culture added another dimension to the support system. The ethnic culture and upbringing of these women contributed to positive affect. It contributed to their growing confidence in their own identities, persistence, and motivation to excel. Their attachments to family and culture acted as a solid support system that alleviated the strain that may have resulted from trying to fulfill the demands of work-family domains. And to conclude, I'd like to conclude with the following thoughts. We as women, as much as we are faced with challenges, we also have the advantage because women's democratic and participatory leadership style is more compatible with the 21st century leadership skills required for effective leadership in this globalized world. Second, we have the opportunity to make a difference in our society in our multiple powerful roles as mothers and daughters and wives, and as leaders in various fields and professions. The choice is ours to decide at which phase of our efforts we want to enter the field. To have a family first, and it's a personal choice to have a family first, take a few years, and especially at the very early stage, we heard about socialization and importance of it at the very early childhood phase. It's okay to take 2 years off, first year off, and also this is a time when it is important when we have policies in place or we work with institutions that provide that support, and also we as women, and when we are at the decision-making level, at the top levels, we will influence the policy making and providing those. And or either, as I said, the family first, or be a leader first, and then have a family, or integrate both is a personal choice. And finally, our ethnic or cultural identity plays a key role in our identity development as an individual. Once we achieve that identity, our perception of Armenian culture will be a positive one that will expand our social capital on our path to achieving and maintaining a balance in work family in our leadership positions. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Hasmik. Before we proceed, I just want to make note, we've been given the green light to go a little further since we started late, so don't despair. We have plenty of time to hear from Gabrielle and Carolyn, and also to take your questions. But Gabrielle, Hasmik mentioned the role of ethnic culture in decision-making. You are clearly in a field where there are, perhaps some boundaries to how explicitly your ethnicity and cultural identity can impact your work. So can you talk a little bit about that with regard to the culture of the legal world?
Sure. So I would say that probably there's a difference between being a lawyer and being a judge when it comes to many things. And you have more latitude when you're a lawyer than when you are a judge. You have latitude in terms of the type of legal work you decide to get involved in. You have latitude in terms of your external activities in the community. And you have latitude in terms of where you want to do your pro bono work or your community civic engagement. With a judge, you're much more circumscribed. We operate under a rule of judicial ethics, and the notion is, and the aspiration is, that when people come to see a judge, what they are receiving is neutrality. And so when you go into court, you want your judge to be a neutral. You don't want to go into judge and have an Armenian judge, an English judge, a woman judge, a man judge. That's not what you want. You want the best judge. And you want a neutral judge. And so there are differences in terms of what your cultural or any other aspect of your identity is when depending on these two, in either of these two roles. That's not to say that cultural identity is unimportant. I only recently learned myself where I was in terms of being an Armenian American judge. One, there are very few of us. Two, I'm an appellate judge, so I'm high in the judicial system. And I really didn't realize that I was the first woman or the highest ranking judge until very recently. And you all clapped. And I thought, why? Why? It doesn't necessarily say whether I'm a good judge, but it's important to you. And it's important to me. And I think it's important because your cultural identity, when you hold a position of power, comes to be symbolic about the success or the power of your community. So in other words, that our community has really thrived in the 100 years after the genocide, to the point where we are producing people who are succeeding in their fields at the highest levels. And not because they're Armenian or anything else, but because they are succeeding because they're terrific. And so in that sense, your cultural identity and my cultural identity is important because I'm symbolic of something. I'm not exactly sure what, but I'm symbolic of something. But at the same time, it's a responsibility because I don't want to be known as a minority judge. I want to be known as the best judge. And I also wanted to be known as the best lawyer, which is in some ways how I became a judge, or what's allowed me to become a judge. And that, I think, is also, but I perceive that as a responsibility to my community as well, that I really do want to succeed because I understand that my success is the greatest tribute that I can give to those who didn't have that opportunity. Whether that was because of sexism in our grandparents' generation or even my mother's generation, or whether that was because of the genocide, because people simply didn't have the opportunity to succeed, or whether it was because our community historically has always been a minority community, wherever it was. I feel that as a responsibility, a happy responsibility, but a responsibility. So I think it's different depending on what kind of law you're practicing.
Well, we've waded into this topic that I find so fascinating, and we've stayed very bipartisan for these 2 days, so brava to everyone here, both in terms of our Armenian politics and our American politics. But recently, a presidential candidate commented about the ethnicity of a judge who was handling his case and inferred that impartiality could not have been maintained. How did, if at all, did that sort of create conversation within the judicial community, and off the record, as best you can.
We never talk politics, judges. So I'll take a less volatile example. At one point, Justice Sotomayor made a comment about a wise Latina judge, and that caused somewhat of a controversy because people said, well, that means she thinks that people who aren't wise Latina women aren't going to be as good or will see the law differently. And that's not true. I don't make up the law when I go onto the bench. The law exists. The law can be moved forward. That's part of my responsibility, is to help develop the law, and it's certainly my responsibility to interpret the law. I'm not going to be able to say the law is something different than it was when I took the bench that morning. However, every judge is also a human being, and no matter how intellectually honest or vigorous we are being, we come to the law with our own experiences. And I think that's what Justice Sotomayor was really getting to, which is that a person's experiences will help inform his or her interpretation of the law, or his or her sense of what justice means. So if I were to ask you, how many of you feel that you are a member of a minority group, how many of you would raise your hands? A minority group. Yeah. So, all right, well, if you feel that you're a member of a minority, and you feel that means that you have some understanding of what it means to be a minority, then maybe your sense of what the discrimination laws or anti-discrimination laws are meant to protect is different. Or if you're facing a case involving a claim of gender discrimination, maybe your experience will inform your view of that case. So I think you can't separate those things. We like to aspire to a neutral view of the law, but we are all coming to the law with our experiences as women, less so as Armenians, because the issues just don't, legal cases don't come to us where that's an issue so much, but I have had cases like that.
So your work is intense, and there are high expectations, and it's very cerebral. So can you talk about the role that music plays as a counter balance to your legal work?
So I think, like we've heard already, and probably we all grew up in families where expectations were very high for us. And there's a lot of music in my family. And we played chamber music when we were children in our house. My parents both played the piano, my father with great enthusiasm, surpassing his skill, but he was therefore the one that we played with more often. I've just always played an instrument throughout. And I completely echo what Hazmig said about the role of external activities in helping to promote your professional achievement. I worked in a very large law firm, and the hours were just brutal. And I always managed to play my violin. And people would say, how do you find time to do this? And I would say, if I didn't do this, I would actually quit my job. I would go crazy. And law is all about talking, as you can tell from my answers are long. We're talking and arguing and talking and arguing, and words and words and words and words. And music, there are no words. And you cannot argue, because if you are going to argue, you will not play music. And so it has been a perfect counterpoint for me throughout.
Thank you so much. We want to segue to Carolyn, who, again, many in this room know her work well. I personally have always had the greatest respect for her for balancing so many multiple roles with such humility, as an activist, as a leader in our community, and as a philanthropist. I think we have much to learn from her perspective, though, again, she's a reluctant, I think, recipient of all of our tremendous respect. I really want to start. I want to give some time to the extraordinary work that she has led at Farm Aid, because undeniably that led to Armenia as a beneficiary of Farm Aid's success. And so, Carolyn, could you talk about what you learned, what lessons from Farm Aid, sort of both in terms of from the environmental point of view, but also from the advocacy point of view, that you were able to transfer to the founding and to this tremendous success that the Armenia Tree Project enjoys to this day?
Hello, I'm not sure I can do that, but I'll try. No, I've been fascinated listening to the speakers today, and I am also very in awe of who I am in the midst of, because I think the panelists and the participants here, each and every one of you has a lot to give, and I would love to enter into conversation with all of you. So, because each time I learn, and I think I look at myself as, just barely sort of starting out in life, which I guess is very strange since I'm kind of old and I'm sort of a relic. But that's how I approach every day, because I really feel like I learn a lot every day. And when I started with Farm Aid, I knew absolutely nothing about what I was supposed to be doing. I was asked to help, and because they realized they were going to probably raise a bunch of money. And so I had never worked for a nonprofit organization. I'd never had anything to do with setting up a 501c3. I knew nothing. So I learned everything the hard way, and I made just about every mistake. If anybody has any questions about what not to do, please, please come to me. I feel like I'm an expert in what not to do, and also I think that's how you learn the most, is when you make mistakes. And so our friend Nubar Afayan always says, he said, what is it? Something is overrated. Mistakes are overrated, or something like that. Great. It's a great saying, which of course I can't remember. But we started because an artist, and I'm sort of thinking here as we're talking, the power of music. The power of music goes way beyond words. It has an impact that you can't necessarily talk about, but it opens up your heart to things, and it has a transformative effect. And an artist saw that something was happening in this country which was wrong. Our family farmers were being forced off the land. I'll just diverge for a minute and say that I think my DNA is that I have always found I'm allergic to when I see oppression. It makes me very uncomfortable. I don't go to sleep well at night if I haven't at least thought about something to do, about something that I've seen or heard about, and it makes me crazy, and I have a huge appetite, and I never can get it all done. But that's the way I am. And so when he saw that that family farmers were being forced off the land, he knew something was wrong with this country. So he said, well, I'll just do what I do. I'm a singer, so I'll have a concert, right? So he threw a concert. 79,000 people came. $7 million was raised. Hey, what are we going to do? We better figure out something to do with this money. So through friends of his, I was asked to sort of figure something out. So that's what I did. And I just want to speak for a moment also to this is sort of contrary to what a lot of people are saying, but I want to speak to the joy of not knowing something. Because when you don't know something, just think of the excitement of the future that you have learning it. It's so much fun. And you'll never not know again. You'll never have that excitement of hearing something and saying, gee, I don't know what that is. Let me figure it out. And so just sort of keep that in mind. A lot of times when I don't know, I'm embarrassed, and I try to figure it out. Like on a conference call, I'll quickly go online and say, what is someone talking about? I do that all the time. Or I kind of wait in the moment sometimes and see if I can figure it out before I ask. I don't mind asking questions at all. I drive people nuts by asking lots and lots of questions. But I think that we figured out what to do. We just took one step after another, and we listened to farmers. And listening, I have found, is hugely important, and found out that farmers knew exactly what the problems were and are, and they knew the solutions. So our job was then to communicate what was happening to farmers, to get more people on board, to connect people, and to create more power for family farmers. And I deeply believe in grassroots power. That I believe that that's where change happens, is when people get together on a community level, on a personal level, and bring things forward with more and more strength as you gain numbers. And that is, I think, probably at the root of how I operate. So I don't know if I answered your question, and I can't remember the question.
Well, and then transforming that into ATP.
Into ATP. Yeah. Well, ATP was sort of the same thing, because we went to Armenia. I went to Armenia a few weeks after the earthquake, and then went back soon afterwards, and I was there during 92, 91, 92, when everybody knows about this horrible dark period. Everybody was cutting down trees. So people were saying, we've got to do something, we've got to do something. So I sort of got sick of people saying that. And my late husband, John O'Connor, was an environmentalist. I'm actually not really an environmentalist. I just believe in it, but I don't really have the knowledge. It's just an instinct. And so we decided to start to see, well, what can we do to start planting trees? So a friend of his had just left a job. She was a fellow Clark graduate, and I kind of, corralled her into, well, let's just sort of start looking at this, Regina. And so she looked at how the Jewish National Fund did it. We started asking a lot of questions about what was happening in Armenia, what had caused it, what the rates of losing trees were all over, in addition to this horrible time of the early 90s with cutting down trees to survive. And that's how we started. We just started to plant, and we started by really knowing very little. I'll just give you one example of something that one of the panels yesterday made me think about this. But when we had our first planting, we had, quotes, contracted with a nursery to bring some trees for the planting. But there wasn't, the commercial code of justice didn't exist then. So there wasn't any contract. But they got there, and after it was supposed to be about 5 cents a tree, it was there. When they delivered them, they said, oh no, it's $1 a tree or something. So at that moment, we realized, okay, we have to be in control of where our trees come from. So we have to have a nursery, right? Because we can't afford this. So that's what we did about next. We created a nursery, and then we realized people needed food, so let's plant mostly fruit trees, and let's do it in backyards so people can have a form of income. And it was just really looking at what the needs were and then figuring out how to do it. And it's amazing when you're in motion, other people want to be in motion with you. So we just went around and found extraordinary people that really wanted to do things. And the first woman, Anahit Garibian, whom I think a lot of you know, was a school teacher, and she knew nothing about the environment or trees, as neither did I. And so she said, I just want to do this. And she was the first person that we hired. She figured out the whole system of community tree planting, how you sign a contract with people in the community who are going to plant the trees, and how you make soil tests beforehand, and she figured this whole thing out on her own. So I guess my experience has been just figuring stuff out. And but I want to credit Lerna, because Lerna, I love Lerna's book. I'm a really slow reader, but I want to see if other people feel that this is in their DNA. I think what I'm maybe speaking to is my DNA, which I guess we all have, and mine actually is half witch also, because my mother's side, I'm related to the first woman hung as a witch in Salem, Rebecca Nurse. So I'm a little scary. But this is a great, I love what Lerna said in 1923, Armenians who were committed to staying put in their homes, this was in Turkey, had to adapt to the new circumstances, and quickly. they had to fashion personal and communal strategies in order to survive the hostile environment without giving up their understanding of Armenianness. Now, I think that having to figure out something is what we have a strength in. And I think that's what Armenians have always done. That's what I think everybody here is an example of. And I've also had to figure out the music business because we have a concert once a year. And that's how we raise money. We're lean and mean. We spend down right to the end every year. We don't have an endowment. We earn our money every year through a concert. So I had to learn the music business, about which I knew nothing, and which is very male and very intimidating. And it took me a long time to figure it out, but I finally figured that everybody's just acting. And when they act a certain way, it's nice. And when they act another way, they're trying to intimidate you. And that's really kind of fun when you learn to play that game. I really learned it, and I like it.
Wait, that's good. I'm sorry, I'm going to indulge. And I want to just, one more question to the panel before we open up. But we've covered so many important topics, and there have been so many consistent themes. But one thing we really haven't talked much about is philanthropy, and how, which is another way that women can take, find leadership in relation to causes or issues that matter to them, and it's another way to get a proverbial seat, a seat at the proverbial table. ATP has given people a chance, like others, organizations, to sort of get invested in something. Started out at $10 a tree, right? Now only $20 a tree. Carolyn, can you speak a little bit to just the importance of women at every age thinking about how to invest resources in causes that they care about to amplify their voices in any way? This is an issue broadly in the giving community. Women are outmatched by male giving exponentially. And so I just wanted to spend 1 second talking about that from your perspective.
Well, it's probably a perverse answer, but I think we should make people feel very uncomfortable if they don't. And by that, and at the same time, it's an invitation to do something that's going to make you feel good. So it's not, I sometimes wonder whether I do something out of discomfort or comfort, and it's like back and forth, back and forth. But it's really, it's such a great gift to be a part of something positive that's going on. So you really want people to know that they are an important part of this effort. And inclusion, I think, is really important. And so I think philanthropy is about, you can't do everything. So when someone else is doing something that you wish you could do, you want to put your arms around that person and say, please go forward. I want to give you all my energy and all my resources. Please do it, because I can't quite do everything. So you want to be that so that people want to do it, because not everybody can do it themselves.
Thank you. On that note, let's open the floor to questions. And okay, Sarah's got the microphone.
This is a comment for Carolyn. I spent 89 to 92 in Yerevan as a refugee child, and there was a camp for refugees on Komitas Street in the park. I don't know if you guys are aware, there's a big park with the trees, and that was the only positive thing that in the summers refugee kids spent there. And I left Yerevan with a hole in my heart in 92 when the trees were cut down. And I just want to thank you because I just came back 3 days ago from Armenia, and I walked with my kids in the same park, and the trees are very young, just like my kids, but they're there. And I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
I have to thank everybody here, because really the Tree Project is a huge communal effort. So everybody here says you're welcome.
Other questions?
Good afternoon. My question is for Justice Uluhujian. First, I wanted to respond to your question. You asked why we clapped for you when we heard the words highest ranking Armenian judge. And to me, as a first-year attorney, it was really inspiring, and it went home for me. And so I wanted to thank you for being here with us today. For me and for my mentees and for any other woman in this room who are interested in a career in the legal justice system, what advice do you have in terms of associations or pro bono work or clerkships that you suggest students or attorneys to partake in to get to a career like yours?
Where are you located?
In Boston.
Okay, so there is an Armenian Bar
Association.
Okay, an Armenian Bar Association. It's a great group of people. Are you with a large firm or a small firm?
A medium-sized firm.
So you're with a firm. It's all about your work in the beginning. It's all about working for the best partner in your firm, learning the most you can from him or her. My biggest advocates and mentors were men. And it wasn't disinterest on their part. It was as selfish. It was also selfish for them because I killed myself for their cases. But at the same time, I learned everything I could from them. So you're young, and this part of your career is about enhancing your skills, because it's your skills that will take you to being the lawyer you can be. So right now, it's about your work, working for the best partners you can in your cases, in your firm, getting on the best cases you can where you'll get the most responsibility. Join the Boston Bar Association. They have a ton of educational activities and do that. If you have the financial flexibility, you could think about trying to clerk, even though you're, do it like a year or two out of law school. You'll learn a lot. But basically, I would say right now, it's building your skills. And then after everyone changes their job, you're in your first job. You should think of it as that, as your first job. It's your growing job. And then think about what is it that you want to do after that, and get in touch with me. Okay?
Thank you very much.
I loved this panel. Thank you so much. I have all the panels. I have a question about the feminists and if they had any connection to the American feminism movement at the time, particularly the right to vote.
So it was called Armenian Women's Association, but they were in fact international, at least internally among Armenians. First of all, I should say that I wanted to mention it, I forgot. So Armenian women's organizations existed at the same time that they were in Istanbul. There was also one in Varna, Bulgaria, in Egypt, in Boston here, in New York, with New Jersey connected to New York one. And definitely, even in Tbilisi, these groups were connected to each other. And in Haygin, they reported on each other's activities. One of their goals was actually in the future, once that Armenia was established, they thought it was going to be established. They were going to bring all of these different women's organizations under one umbrella. Didn't happen. So, they did not have any organic, like one-on-one relationships or official institutional relationships with non-Armenian feminists in America or in France. But certainly, personally, they know some of them. This is reflected in Haygin. Some feminists, for instance, who have supported the Armenian cause back at the time, right after the genocide, they are given coverage in Haygin. And also, whatever is happening in the international arena regarding women's suffrage, International Women's League for Equality, all these organizations, Haygin reports on them. Armenian Women's Association discussed all these things, and they took them as examples. For instance, when in 1920, early 20 or late 1919, first British woman parliamentarian resumed her role, her office, Haygin was very proud of it, the journal itself, and they took it as their sex, like their gender identity. It was part of their gender identity rather than Armenian identity that they were proud of at this moment, and they used it as a good example that Armenians should aspire to. But of course, there was resistance to this, right? Some of the newspapers, mainstream Armenian newspapers, reported it as something that is good for the British women, but not for Armenian women, because it would be seen, it is the exact same discourse that we saw in Mara Motasyan's discussion, because it would be seen, or was it before? In any case, it's still so much with us that it would be seen, women acquiring public laws, seen as a threat to Armenians, to Armenian family. So they would be less mothers, less capable mothers. Even this morning when we heard Selina Doğan talking about Erdogan, for instance, right? There's this discourse that if you don't give birth to 3 children, or if you work outside the home, you are less of a woman. This was the same exact discourse that you see among some Armenian men and some women, even though minor, big names that I really don't want to name right now, but we know, writing about these things openly. Like if you become a lawyer, a judge, even this discourse exists. So you go out and you defend your client, but what happens to your baby who's in need of your breast milk, for instance? Like that kind of sensationalized discourse. You go, even medical doctors were criticized. There were dentists, women dentists. You see in Haygin, you see commercials for these dentists, for instance, or gynecologists, women. They went to Paris, came to America, they returned to Istanbul, they have their offices. On the one hand, they exist. On the same pages, they are being criticized by anti-feminists. But Haygin provides space for this criticism so that they respond to it. So it was a lively debate.
Yes. Digin Walahajian, please. This is just a contribution to what you were saying. You were saying that sometimes, our ethnic origin can have an impact, This is a true story. The aunt of my father, he lived in Stuttgart in Germany, and
Could you
he passed.
let her know she wasn't able to be at your panel? Could you let her know? Do you know who this is, Selina? Could you just explain your role?
Okay, I'm Selina Doğan. I'm from the Turkish Parliament. I'm a member of Parliament in Turkey. I'm from the Armenian community in Turkey.
She's a lawyer.
And I used to be a lawyer before I was elected. Okay, the aunt of my father, he lived in Stuttgart. He was, along beside his profession, he used to work as a translator at the tribunals, as Turkish translator, because he knew to speak Turkish. So he knows the judges, he has good relationship with them. Because of historical reasons, when he moved to Germany when he was at the age of 17, if I'm not wrong, he had to change his name because his original name was Hagopcan Avedikyan, but he had to change it, I don't remember, into something else. And then once he goes to Germany, he wanted to take his original name. And he applied to the court, but it's very difficult to change, also in Turkey, it's very difficult to change the name. So he should somehow convince the judge. And, there's a very famous book about the Musaler in Hatay, the Musaleran Karasun Ora. Yes. Yes. So the judge had already read, because the writer is German, he read this book and he knows the story, and just at the first audience he accepted his demand. So, yeah, so this is a true story.
Importance of history also.
I'll tell you the story. So in my court, when I arrived, apparently everyone was trying to practice how to say my name. But I sit on a court where there are 3 judges who we sit on as a panel, and they had never had nameplates because historically people's names were just what you would expect them to be as judges. But when I arrived, they thought, oh my God, no one's going to be able to say this, so they got nameplates. But they didn't want to just put it for me, so they got nameplates for everyone. So that was my Smith, Brown, Wolahojian.
Hi, I wanted to say something about the earlier panel, the one with before lunch, where we had 3 women from Armenia who were doing such wonderful work in Armenia. I was one of the first people to go to Armenia in 1991 when I was offered to do a starring role in the first feature film that was being shot outside of the state-owned and run studios. So I arrived in Armenia, it was curfew time, and it was a very critical period just around in January of 1991. And I was initially going there for 4 weeks to shoot this movie, and I ended up staying 2.5 months because I wanted to. No electricity, no water, I've lived the whole spectrum. At that time, I was assigned, because I was so fascinated and I was discovering the Armenian film industry, which I was ignorant about at the time. It happens to the best of us. And the Ministry of Culture at the time offered me to be their representative in cinema. I had no idea what that meant. And they say, oh, when you go, you will find out. So I come back to the United States. I was talking about it casually to a friend. He happened to be a journalist at the LA Business Journal. Next thing I know, a friend is calling me, your picture is in the LA Business Journal. It says actress promotes Armenian film industry. And I go, oh my God, now I have a huge responsibility. But there was nothing there at the time, no infrastructure. Moscow had shut the faucet. There was no money. There was nothing. And I was not only battling against all the impossibilities of trying to establish an infrastructure or convince people how things are done. On top of it, I was a woman in a world where only men ruled. The producer, the director, now, first of all, director is God there. There was no notion of producer. And it was like a huge uphill battle. It burned me out. I did a lot, but not enough. And then at some point, I decided to go. So I salute all the women who are successfully doing things today in Armenia. Maybe it's time that I go back, but that's a comment. As far as what Lerna was saying about misogyny, this is something that all of us are brought up with. We face it in our families, in our daily life, in our communities, in our societies, which is, there's so few Armenian organizations now that have women on their boards. And it's very good to have AWA, it's very good to have an Armenian women's organization, but it's very important for us to be in everywhere, not just as a separate organization for women, but be much more involved. And every time we notice a misogynistic behavior or a funny picture like the other one we saw with all the men lined up with the vehapar and this and that, and it's like lines and lines of men for as far as you could see, to make fun of it, to bring it up, to point it out, to make comments on it in the newspapers. I do it all the time. Like when there's an article about politician this and that visited, I go, wow, I don't see any women in this picture. Where are the women? This kind of thing. I think it is our responsibility. We shouldn't just sit there and accept the situation. If we do, then we only have ourselves to blame. So that's all I want to say.
No, I totally agree. Yeah.
Are we doing one more question? The light. Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, I just, Nora, I just would like to make one, not clarification, but additional information. Unfortunately, I do not totally agree with you because we do have some organization, and at least I know in the Los Angeles area, which are sort of top-level leadership positions in which there are women, and I'm a part of some of those organizations.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Yes, I wanted to.
No, but okay, then can I just say something? I don't think... there are definitely women, but they are in in leadership positions, but in relation to our numbers, we are not represented, and there are reasons for it that we are trying to understand.
Well, I think trends are changing, and we do have positive change.
Yeah, 2 days ago, I read on the paper that there is this new Washington-based lobbying / organization. What is Justice? Armenian Legal Center for Justice. It involves justice. It's the board is all that. The chair, the secretary, the whole board is men.
The only woman that I could see was Kate Nahabedyan.
Good for you. I didn't see even that.
She's not on the board, but she's a lawyer. Yeah, she's like an important employee, but the board is entirely men. This is unacceptable.
All right. With that passion, we're going to end and be motivated to make a difference. I really want to thank one more time this incredible panel.